The ground itself held its breath. In the absolute moonless dark of an Albanian mountain pass, an army of 40,000 of the Ottoman Empire's finest soldiers, the unstoppable tide that had drowned Constantinople just years before, marched blindly into a tomb they believed was a road. Above them, invisible, motionless, were 8,000 hearts beating with a cold, patient fury. Their general, a man who had once been the Sultan's own champion, now watched his former masters with the calm of a predator. This was not a battle waiting to happen. This was a massacre already in motion. A clockwork trap of steel and stone where every cog was set, every trigger laid, and the only thing left was for the giant to take one more step into the darkness. This is Albulena. Forget everything you think you know about war, about numbers, about victory. Because what happened here in 1457 wasn't a fight. It was a brutal, surgical ambush that would see 8,000 warriors orchestrate the systematic annihilation of an army 5 times their size. And it all began not with a battle cry, but with a terrifying silence. A silence that, if you listen closely, you can still hear whispering the first rule of survival. The predator who believes he cannot be hunted is already dead. To understand the sheer, gut-churning scale of this trap, you must first feel the arrogance in the Ottoman ranks. Their commander, Isak Bey Evranoz, was a legend, a man who had carved empires with his sword. He marched at the head of a living avalanche, the elite Janissaries, forged in fire and fanaticism, the swift Sipahi cavalry, a storm of hooves and curved steel, and a sprawling mass of auxiliaries. They were the definition of invincible. Their mission was simple: crush the Albanian rebellion, capture the head of the man who had become a ghost haunting the Sultan's dreams, Skanderbeg. They moved with the heavy certainty of a force that believed the very earth would flatten before them. What they didn't know, what they couldn't conceive, was that Skanderbeg wasn't hiding. He was waiting. He had personally chosen every rock, every tree, every inch of the killing ground at Albulena. He had studied his enemy not as a stranger, but as a former brother in arms. He knew their drills, their fears, their pride. And he knew that pride was the crack in their armor, wide enough to drive a nation's vengeance through. Think about that for a second. The absolute confidence required to look at a force of 40,000 and not see a threat, but see a target. A complex puzzle where every marching column, every standard, every campfire is just a component of your own design. That's the mind we're dealing with here. A mind that saw the future not as a mystery, but as a sequence of events he could personally arrange, like stones on a board. And right now, the Ottoman army was his final, triumphant piece, placed exactly where he wanted it. Now, let's freeze this moment. Right now. Look at the Ottoman column snaking through the valley, a river of torchlight and polished metal, a dragon of conquest. Now, look up. See nothing. That's the genius. On those forested slopes, Skanderbeg's men weren't just soldiers. They were parts of the landscape. Farmers with bows hardened by a lifetime of hunting. Blacksmiths with axes they'd forged themselves. Shepherds who knew these paths better than the lines on their own hands. They weren't an army mustered on a field. They were the spirit of the mountains given flesh and fury. And they held in their hands not just weapons, but the components of a Rube Goldberg machine of death. Ropes tied to piles of boulders, logs greased and stacked above narrow defiles, archers positioned in interlocking fields of fire. This wasn't a defensive position. It was a giant, panoramic crossbow. And the entire Ottoman army had just pressed its chest against the trigger. But here's a detail that chills the blood. Many of those Albanian warriors had spent the previous days and nights moving those rocks, setting those snares, with nothing but their hands and raw determination, their muscles burning with the effort, all while knowing that if a single Ottoman scout stumbled upon their work, the entire plan, their entire hope for freedom, would evaporate in a single bloody skirmish. The pressure they carried wasn't just the weight of the stones. It was the weight of a nation's future on their shoulders, a pressure that would either crush them or forge them into something unbreakable. And as they waited in the freezing dark, that pressure turned to a focused, crystalline hatred for the army slumbering below. But here's the hook that changes everything. This wasn't just about killing soldiers. Skanderbeg aimed for something far more fragile: the enemy's mind. Woven into the Ottoman ranks were thousands of conscripted Albanians, men forced to fight for the Sultan against their own kin. Skanderbeg's plan had a psychological virus coded into its violence. He would use the Ottomans' greatest strength, their overwhelming numbers, as the vector for their own paralyzing fear. In the coming chaos, a well-timed shout of "Pardon for Albanians" would act like a psychic detonation, turning suspicion into panic, and comrades into potential traitors. He wasn't just building a trap of rocks and arrows. He was building a trap of doubt. And doubt in the heat of hell is more deadly than any sword. Imagine being one of those conscripts in the Ottoman camp the night before. You hear the confident boasts of the Turkish officers. You see the endless sea of tents. You feel the invincible momentum of the empire. Yet, in your heart, you know your own people are in those mountains. You might have a brother, a cousin, a childhood friend waiting up there. Your loyalty isn't to the Sultan. It's a chain that's been forcibly wrapped around your neck. Skanderbeg knew that chain had a weak link, and he held the tool to snap it. He wasn't just a general. He was a puppeteer of human desperation. And he was about to make 40,000 men dance to a tune of his own composition, a symphony where the first movement was terror, the second was betrayal, and the finale was annihilation. The signal came not as a roar, but as a singular alien sound that ripped the night in two, a sharp echoing blast from a lura, an Albanian war horn. That sound was the first hook in the flesh of the Ottoman giant. In the heartbeat of stunned silence that followed, the world erupted. The mountainside didn't just attack, it vomited death. From the front, a thunderous roar as guided rock slides sheared off the cliff face, crushing the vanguard and sealing the valley's head like a slamming gate. From the rear, a chorus of war cries and the earth-shaking rumble of cavalry. Skanderbeg's own horsemen, hidden in gullies, now charged to cork the bottle. The mighty Ottoman column was instantly transformed into a trapped, writhing serpent. But pause here. Imagine the physical sensation for those first Ottomans hit by the rockslide. One moment, you're marching, the gravel crunching underfoot, the man in front of you a vague shape in the torchlight. The next, a sound like the world cracking open, a pressure wave of air that knocks the breath from your lungs. And then darkness, absolute and final. As thousands of tons of ancient stone erase you and 100 of your comrades from existence, there's no battle, no glory, just instantaneous, anonymous oblivion. That was the first message Skanderbeg sent. You are not fighting men. You are fighting the mountain itself. And the mountain has decided you are an infection. It will scrape away. And then, the true butchery began from the flanks. This was the killing hour. From both slopes, a hailstorm of arrows and javelins descended, not in random volleys, but in targeted, disciplined waves aimed at the officers, the standard bearers, the men trying to form a cohesive line. The center of the column, packed and paralyzed, became a slaughterhouse. Albanian warriors, screaming the name of their homeland, swept down in vicious, localized charges. They didn't form a line to meet a line. They flowed like water into the weakest points, hacking at the edges of formations with long swords and axes before melting back into the chaos. The Ottomans, trained for set-piece battles on open plains, had no language for this kind of violence. Their discipline, their famed unity, became their cage. Packed tight, they couldn't advance, couldn't retreat, could barely raise their shields as death reigned from everywhere and nowhere at once. Picture a janissary, a soldier taken as a child, trained for decades to be the perfect instrument of the Sultan's will. His entire identity is built on order, on formation, on moving as one piece of a great machine. Now, that machine is jammed, shrieking, breaking apart. The man to his left is gurgling, an arrow through his throat. The man to his right is screaming, trying to claw his way backward over the press of bodies. His training offers no protocol for this. His world, which was once a clear hierarchy of commands and maneuvers, has dissolved into a primal soup of panic and pain. This is the moment Skanderbeg fought for, the moment the superior weapon becomes useless, the moment the master's tool turns against the master's hand. Now, let's amplify the sensory horror, because history is blood and noise and smell. Imagine the cacophony, the metallic shriek of steel on steel, the wet thud of axe meeting bone, the deafening crack of splitting timber and stone, the screams of men and horses woven into a tapestry of pure terror. The air, once cold and clean, grew thick with the coppery stench of blood, the acrid bite of churned earth, and the visceral smell of bowels released in death. Torches, knocked to the ground, cast hellish, dancing shadows where silhouettes of men grappled in a grotesque dance. This was not the glory of war from a distant painting. This was the raw, grinding mechanics of annihilation, where 8,000 enraged defenders turned a narrow valley into a factory whose sole product was Ottoman corpses. But even in this factory, there was a grim efficiency. The Albanians fought with an intimate, personal rage. This wasn't a foreign invasion to them. This was a personal violation. The Ottomans had burned their villages, taxed their families into poverty, taken their sons. Every sword stroke was a repayment of a debt. Every fallen Turk a down payment on a future free from fear. This gave their violence a terrifying endurance. They weren't tiring, they were exercising. And as the night wore on, that emotional fuel turned the battle into a ritual of purification by fire and iron. And right at the peak of this bedlam, Skanderbeg unleashed his masterstroke, the psychological hook he'd saved for this exact moment. Through the din, voices shouted in clear, deliberate Turkish, "Pardon! Throw down your arms, Albanians, and live! Pardon!" The effect was electric, catastrophic. In an army already dissolving in panic, these words were a lightning bolt of salvation for some, and a dagger of treason for others. The conscripted Albanians in the Ottoman ranks now faced an impossible choice: die for a sultan who enslaved them, or seize this chance and betray the men beside them. The shout shattered the last illusion of unity. Fights broke out within the Ottoman press. Men turned on each other. The social fabric of the army disintegrated, transforming the chaos into a total every-man-for-himself rout. Skanderbeg hadn't just outfought them. He had outthought them on the deepest, most human level. Now, follow this thread further into the nightmare. Imagine you are a Turkish sipahi, an elite cavalryman. You're already dismounted, your horse lost in the madness. You're fighting back to back with what you think is a fellow soldier, an Albanian auxiliary you've marched with for weeks. You hear the shout of "Pardon." You feel the man behind you go rigid. In that split second, you have to decide, is he still your comrade, or is he now a threat, calculating your value against his freedom? That moment of hesitation, that microsecond of doubt, is all it takes. In the close-quarter press of bodies, the Albanian auxiliary makes his choice for survival, and you feel a sudden, searing heat in your kidney as his dagger finds its mark. This was the true weapon of Albulena. Not the arrow, but the suspicion. Not the sword, but the betrayed glance. Skanderbeg turned the Ottoman army into a hall of mirrors, where every reflection might be an enemy. The slaughter entered its final, grimmest phase as the Ottoman resistance crumbled into pure, mindless flight. But there was no escape. The valley was a sealed tube. Men threw down their heavy armor and weapons, scrambling up the slopes only to be cut down by Albanians who knew every foothold. Others fled into the icy, fast-moving river that ran through the pass, where the current dragged the wounded and the panicked under to a cold, watery grave. The Albanian cavalry, now acting as hunters rather than blockers, ran down fleeing groups on the more open ground beyond the valley's rear, cutting them apart with ruthless efficiency. The pursuit was relentless because Skanderbeg understood a fundamental truth. A defeated enemy can return, but a broken, shattered, traumatized enemy becomes a story. A legend of fear that does your work for you for generations. He wasn't just seeking a tactical victory. He was crafting a strategic deterrent. A tale so horrifying, it would make future Ottoman commanders think twice, thrice, before entering his mountain realm. The message was carved into the landscape with Ottoman blood. These mountains are not a territory to be conquered. They are a living entity that consumes armies. Dawn finally crept over the carnage. A pale, indifferent witness to the scene from a nightmare. The valley of Albulena was no longer a geographical feature. It was a charnel house. The proud banners of the Star and Crescent lay trampled in mud and gore. The field was littered with the detritus of a destroyed army, shattered shields, broken spears, and the still forms of thousands of Ottoman soldiers. The scale of the loss is almost incomprehensible. Contemporary chroniclers stagger at the numbers. Of the 40,000 who entered, perhaps 10,000 escaped. The rest were dead, captured, or scattered to the winds, broken beyond recovery. But let's make that number real. 30,000 men. Picture a major sports stadium, packed to capacity. Now imagine every single person in that stadium dead, stripped, and piled in a muddy valley. That was the logistical, human horror left for the survivors and the Albanian scavengers. The spoils were staggering: enough weapons, armor, tents, and supplies to equip Skanderbeg's rebellion for years, turning the Ottoman war machine into the very engine of its own opposition. The military might that had threatened to consume the Balkans was left gutted on a mountainside, a feast for crows and a monument to one man's genius. For Sultan Mehmed II, the conqueror, the man who took Constantinople, this was more than a defeat. It was a humiliating decade-long setback that shook the foundations of his imperial project. The news would have arrived at his court like a physical blow. This wasn't a minor border skirmish. It was the annihilation of a significant field army, a loss of prestige that emboldened his enemies across Europe and exposed a fatal flaw in his seemingly unstoppable expansion. It proved that will and wisdom could, in fact, build a wall that even the mightiest cannon of the age could not breach. For a Europe perpetually trembling at the Ottoman advance, Albulena was a desperately needed beacon, a proof that the tide could be stopped, that the monster could be made to bleed. It bought precious time for fractured kingdoms to, however briefly, consider unity over squabble. And for Albania, for the clan Skanderbeg had welded into a nation, Albulena was the immortal legend. It was the day the dragon's teeth were sown and sprang up as warriors. Skanderbeg, the dragon of Albania, wasn't just a leader. He was now a myth in his own lifetime. A tactician spoken of in the same breath as Hannibal and Alexander. He had done the impossible with a fraction of the force, using the land itself as a weapon and the enemy's mind as a trigger to pull off one of the most lopsided, brutal ambushes in all of military history. The victory cemented the League of Leze, that fragile alliance of princes, and gave the Albanian people something more valuable than gold: an unshakable belief in their own destiny. They weren't just defending hills, they were defending an idea that freedom, once tasted, is worth any price in blood. So why does the echo of Albulena's war horns matter to you right now, today, centuries removed from the blood and the cold of that valley? Because this story is the ultimate archetype. It's the blueprint for every underdog who ever stared down a Goliath. It's a masterclass in turning weakness into strength, in using intelligence, terrain, and psychology as force multipliers. It's about the explosive power of a unified cause against a divided, overconfident opponent. In a world that often feels dominated by giants, be they empires, corporations, overwhelming challenges, or personal struggles, Albulena screams a timeless, electrifying truth. Size is a fact, but victory is a choice. The rules are only unbreakable until someone clever and brave enough decides to rewrite them. The clever, the determined, the brave can redefine the game. They can turn a mountain pass into a masterstroke, a weakness into a weapon, a moment of despair into a legend of triumph. Skanderbeg teaches us that strategy is not just about resources, but about perception, about understanding the cracks in your opponent's armor and the hidden levers in your own environment. He teaches us that sometimes the most powerful move is not to meet force with force, but to step aside, let the giant stumble, and then help him fall into the abyss he never saw coming. This story isn't a dusty relic. It's a mirror. It asks us what our own mountains are. What are the seemingly insurmountable challenges we face? And more importantly, what are the hidden passes, the psychological leverages, the unique terrains we can use to our advantage? Albulena proves that victory doesn't always go to the biggest or the richest, but to the one who thinks the deepest and plans the hardest, and fights with something more potent than anger, with purpose. If stories of brilliant strategy, impossible defiance, and the raw, pivotal hinges of history that swung the fate of continents fuel your mind and fire your spirit, then you cannot afford to be a passive spectator. You are living in a time where understanding the patterns of the past is the key to navigating the chaos of the present. Don't just hear this history, internalize it. Let it be the fuel for your own battles, big or small. This channel is dedicated to unearthing these forgotten masterstrokes, these epic stands, these moments where the world held its breath and a single decision changed everything. We dive deep into the psychology, the tactics, the human stories behind the legends. If you want to arm your mind with these lessons, if you want to join a community that believes history is the greatest arsenal of inspiration we have, then you need to take action now. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Don't just watch one story, own the entire narrative. We're uploading deep dives like this every single week, and you will not want to miss a second of it. Your history, your inspiration, your next strategic insight is waiting. Join us. Click now.